CSS3 allows us to do a lot of cool things with shadows. Again, something that you would have had to do in Photoshop, export the assets, use them as background images and images, so on and so forth. Again, very, very tedious process to do all these things, but in CSS3, we could do it straight in the browser and it loads quicker because when you're exporting assets and images, that's adding up precious space when a user is downloading your website on their device, whether it's a computer or a mobile device, so on and so forth. It actually loads way quicker when you're just loading CSS because CSS is simply just text. And then it's loading that text and rendering it in the browser. It's a way quicker process. It's next to nothing in terms of size, and it's just all around easier for the developer to create rather than to design it, export it, use it as a background image, and make the user download it. So CSS3 is great in so many ways. So let's talk about the shadows. Create a new file called shadows.html, basic structure, add that title. Make sure you use the same structure as colors and box.html, where you've got normalize and your custom styles hooked in, along with your IE conditional comment. Give the body the ID of shadows and add a container in there with a level 1 heading and just a paragraph tag with some lorem ipsum. Once you've got all that stuff in there, let's get going. So if you have to pause the video, that's totally okay to get yourself set up. And then open up your style.css, add a new style here, and copy what I put here. You got your shadows, that's the body with the ID of shadows. Select that container, give it a width, margin 40 pixels auto, and padding 20 pixels, border box for the box sizing, and then a background of FC3 or whatever color you want. So once you're up to speed, let's jump in further. So the first thing I want to show you is text shadow. You can actually add shadows to to your HTML text. So let me just select here in the shadows, shadows ID, and then I'm selecting the level 1 heading here. And I want to give it, let's say, a color first of white. Now, if I wanted to add a little more contrast here, it's kind of hard because what if I liked the white on the yellow, but it's a little bit hard to read? Well, you can add a CSS3 shadow by going text shadow, and then there are a couple different, the value you put in here, there's a syntax involved. So there is a vertical shadow, a horizontal shadow in its simplest form. So I could say 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and then that would be enough. So you got your horizontal shadow, your vertical shadow and horizontal shadow. But the thing is here is the default is white. So I could change the color in the third part of the syntax here to just say black. And now you can see CSS3 shadows. So if I modify these properties here, or these values, let's say 0 pixels. So now we only have vertical shadow. So this is horizontal and vertical. That's how it works. I could change the value of this to whatever I want. So 5 pixels, 3 pixels, 1 pixel. I could do 1 pixel horizontal as well. I could do -1 to move it around. I could do -1 and -1. I could have 0 for this one and just -1 like that to create like a little bit of a carved effect. Here, let's move it up 2 pixels. So it kind of looks like it's carved into the background there. You can also change your color. Let me just use something like 2 pixels and 2 pixels to something, say RGBA, if you want to be a bit more specific. So let's say 0, 0, 0, and then 0.3. So I'm using black, but 30% in the alpha channel. And so it's a bit more subtle of a background or a shadow on the text. The other value you can add within this syntax is blur. So you have the vertical shadow, the horizontal shadow, and you can add a third here before the color for blur. So let's say 5 pixels, and that blurs the shadow. So let's use a bit more harsh of a background color here so you can see. So you could see that it has blurred. The bigger the value, the bigger the blur. So you can see CSS3 shadows. It's kind of made the background, the text shadow, more subtle and more blurry. And the smaller that is, the more sharp the blur, if that makes sense. So that is text shadow. You can also add multiple text shadows. So let's go like this. Let's try something. 1 pixel, 1 pixel, no blur, just 1 pixel. And let's actually do 2 pixels here. To move that over, just separate it by a comma. And let's say 2 pixels, 1 pixel, and pink. Oh, it's hard to see that one. Let's go for white. So now you can kind of see it in the background there. What if I gave it a blur, 4 pixels? Maybe so we could see this better, I'm going to change these values. Let's try blue and red. So you can see here that you can see both of these shadows. Obviously, this is a pretty ugly example, and you could have this be a much nicer, you could use this much nicer with better colors, but this is simply just for showing you the example. So let me just try 0 and then 2 there, and then I'll do the same here, 0, but let's do 2. But I'll make this one have a blur of 10, and this one will have a blur of 5 pixels. And so you can see both shadows there kind of standing out. And so that's the text shadow. And you could do that on any text. The other one thing I could show you here is the box shadow. This one is a cool one. So it's simply a shadow on a box. And so let's just select the shadows container here. Actually, I think we selected it up here already. There we go. I'm just going to select it here and just go box shadow. And this one is similar to text shadow in that you have the horizontal shadow, the vertical shadow, and the color. There are also other optional values you can add. So let's just start with something very basic here. Let's say we're going to go for 4 pixels, 10 pixels, and we'll go for 333. So here we have something very simple and straightforward, and maybe we'll even make it let's make it look nicer. So there you go. That's kind of a cool little effect. It's kind of a cool design there. And what's neat about box shadows is that it doesn't add any width to the element. So the element is just 600 pixels, and that just sits behind and outside. So it's not adding extra elements. It's not adding extra width or height. It's just simply a shadow that doesn't interfere with anything. So it's kind of cool. Whereas before, without CSS3, you'd actually have to create multiple elements. So 2 elements, one was black, one was yellow in this case, and position it absolute. So and put it behind, and then use the top and right to move it to different positions to make it look like you're having sort of a shadow. But this simply you just need to do box shadow. Now you also have the blur. The blur value, you can change the blur to make it blurrier, to look more like a shadow. You could change the color to be a bit more subtle, like let's say DDD. And so it kind of has a bit of a subtle shadow in the background there. Let's just make it darker so you can see it better though. If I were to change these properties, so I put the horizontal, actually let me just start this over here. So we got 0 and 0. This one is the vertical shadow. So if I just wanted to move the vertical shadow, I've got that there. I can remove the blur altogether. And then you could also use negative values if you wanted to position over that way. The other thing is there's the spread. So we have the horizontal shadow, the vertical shadow, the blur, so we could say 5 pixels, and then the spread is another value you can use. And watch, let me show you here. It moves the spread. So the blur is one thing, but spread is how far the shadow spreads out. So you could see here that when I added the 10 there, it spread that shadow out further, so it has a bigger impact. You can also use negative values, and that kind of makes it disappear a bit, but you can do a cool trick here. So let me just show you. I'm going to use 0 horizontal. I'm going to move it down 15 pixels. Let's try 20 pixels. And the blur, I'm going to have it be about 10. And the spread, I'm going to move it -5. Let's go negative 20. Let's try 15. There we go. So now it kind of has this subtle shadow just sitting in under, kind of popping it out forward. It's not on the left, right. It's just kind of in the center there. So it's kind of a cool little trick. So that's the horizontal shadow, vertical shadow, blur, spread, color. That's how the box shadow and text shadow works in CSS3.